Hello, students. This is Dr. Joseph. In this conversation and the next one, I want to talk about poetry analysis, how to write a good and an effective poetry analysis, how to analyze our poems. So, this video is divided into parts. In the first part, I will be talking about some instructions. I will be providing some guidelines how to analyze a poem. Okay. Um, Many of you have a favorite poet. I have several, for example, Emily Dickinson, Langston Hughes, Jacques Romain, Aimé Césaire, William Wordsworth, Shakespeare, Robert Frost. So, and County Cullen, for example. Now, a poet has a function he or she plays in society. Generally, a poet speaks to the public. A poet has an audience. Through the means or the vehicle or the tool of poetry, the poet articulates his beliefs, his perspectives on life, his discontent or his satisfaction. Poets use poetry to cry, to inform people, to call people to action, to express protest, to protest against, for example, a social order, to protest against a public policy, for example, to express, for example, human interaction, to talk about human interaction and so forth. But poets use different devices, okay, to articulate their message, okay. For example, there are different what we call poetic tools or poetic devices a poet employs in his work. For example, the notion of metaphor. Metaphor is when you do a direct comparison. You compare one subject to another, or you compare two subjects, compare a contrast, metaphor. And there's also the notion of personification. Personification is a poetic device that gives human qualities to non-human things or to non-human objects. For example, such as a tree, an animal like a dog or a cat, or a rock, for example. There's also the poetic tool called tone. Through the poetic tone, the poet, as a human being, is able to express his or her emotions. So, the emotion of the poet is conveyed through the poem. Also, the next poetic device that is used in poetry is called point of view. Point of view. A point of view of a poem indicates the person or the speaker who is telling the story, who's telling the poem, who's recounting the event. There's also the use of imagery. Imagery is the use of pictures with words. So the poet create pictures with words. Words are very important in poetry. Now, when you analyze a poem, you need to pay attention to those different poetic devices we mentioned: simile, metaphor, personification, tone, point of view, alliteration, imagery, symbolism. All of those devices are used to convey the message of the poem. A poem is a story. A poem is a story. A poem has a major theme. or some poems, the way they are structured, may have different themes or different or sub minor themes, but most poems have a central theme. It's very important to pay attention to that major theme. Everything in that poem is connected to that major idea. So, first of all, our goal as a reader is to identify the central idea or the central theme of that poem. That's going to help us to analyze the poem. For example, we can ask the question, how does the theme convey the poem's message? Or what does the poet do to articulate that theme through the lines and the stanzas uh, that are part of the poetic structure? So when we read a poem, you need to pay attention to the title. The title of the poem is very significant. It will determine what will take place in the poem. Also, the title of the poem most of the time is connected to the central idea of the poem. For example, in Langston Hughes' signature poem, the Negro, the Negro Speaks of Rivers, right? So that's the title of the poem. The Negro Speaks of Rivers. It's a title that has a a major subject, right? A main subject, which is Negro. There's a main verb, speaks, okay, and the Negro speaks. The action of the Negro is connected to rivers. So now, the next thing you want to do here, you want to read the poem. You want to read the poem several times because poetry has to do with music, what we call phonetic, okay, uh, in linguistics. So you want to pay attention to the different ways or different means the poet uses language, uses words to produce sound, to produce rhythm. So first, read the poem several times. You want to read the poem line by line, stanza by stanza. Pay attention to every word. Pay attention to the forms of the verb, to the sentence structure, to punctuation, the punctuations that are used in the poem, like such as commas, semicolon, colon. Also, pay attention to the tense of the verb. Are the verbs in the past tense? Are the verbs in the present tense? You need to ask why some verbs are in the present tense, why some verbs are in the past tense. Okay. So as you begin your analysis, as I said before, you need to read the poem, right? First step, read the poem several times, 3 to 4 times. Read it out, read it loud, so you can hear the sound. Then you're going to read the poem line by line, stanza by stanza. Then you need to pay attention to how the lines in the poem are connected together. Okay, how the lines are connected together. It's important. The lines should have connection. There has to be relationships between the lines and between the stanzas. Okay, they most poems are not loose poems. Okay, there's a sense of a coherent narrative, a coherent story that is told through the use of the literary lines and the literary stanzas. Okay, so the next step you're going to do here, you want to you want to paraphrase each line. You want to paraphrase each line. By paraphrasing each line, you are expressing your understanding, your comprehension of the poem. If you can use your own words to paraphrase the poem line by line, trust me, you will achieve greatness. You will achieve success in the poetry analysis. Okay, by paraphrasing the lines, you are using your own words, your own language, your own vocabulary to convey the exact idea the poet is conveying through those lines and stanzas. Another thing that you want to do here, you want to pay attention to the historical and cultural context of the poem. For example, what was happening at the time this poem was written? Okay, was there a war? How was the society? How were the people in society functioning or relating to each other? Was there a major event in that country, or was there a major event in the world? So, the context, the historic context and historical trajectories will help you to make sense of that um, of the poem. Another thing that's very important, you might want to pay attention to the circles of influence. What are the possible circles? What are the possible writers who have influenced that poet? Okay, the voice of poet is very important. Every poem has a voice. Every poem has a speaker. The next thing you want to do here, um, those are questions, right? You need to be asking. What what do you think the poem means? In other words, what is the overall message of the poem? What is exactly the speaker of the poem trying to convey? Okay, first, okay. The second question I meant to say, who is the subject of the poem? Who is the subject of the poem? Who is doing the speaking? Who is the speaker? Who is the narrator, the person who narrates the poem? What is the narrator telling us, telling you, telling me as readers? What is that narrator talking about? What is the poem is saying? Why do you think, for example, the author wrote that poem? What was going on in the author's mind? Was the author dealing with a specific circumstance in his or her own life? Okay. Um, Also, you want to pay attention to the poet's attitude. The poet's attitude. For example, is the poet mad, angry, moderate, joyful? This is very important because every poem has a tone, and every poem the speaker articulates his or her tone through the lines and stanzas. Also, if there are shiftings from one person to another person or from one narrator to another narrator, you want to pay attention to why that change happens in the poem. Okay? Again, if you can follow those basic structures, those basic instructions, guidelines, that will help you to write a fantastic, amazing, very instructive poetry analysis. Again, this is Dr. Joseph. In the next video, I will be using Langston Hughes' signature poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So we're going to try to apply those guidelines, those instructions into that poem so you can see how it's done. Have a great day.